At 10, we're live in Newcastle as the Chancellor delivers his budget in a year that's likely to see a general election. There are cuts to national insurance and an extension to child benefit, but the overall tax burden nears an 80-year high.
We today put this country back on the path to lower taxes.
Give with one hand, take even more with the other.
We'll be assessing who the winners and losers are from today's announcements.
The cost of childcare has gone up, the cost of food, the cost of petrol. So again, I don't think it's going to make that much of a difference.
We've got nursery fees to consider and they are really expensive. So yeah, more money the better at the moment.
The economy is always front and centre in an election year. It was certainly front and centre today. The battle for economic credibility is on.
Odessa in Ukraine comes under attack as President Zelensky visits, along with the Greek Prime Minister. And Nikki Haley, Donald Trump's only challenger for the Republican nomination for the White House, drops out of the race.
On BBC London, millions of pounds for Canary Wharf and housing in East London in the Chancellor's budget, but disappointment from the capital's hospitality industry. We have reaction and analysis.
A very good evening to you from Newcastle as the dust settles on Jeremy Hunt's budget, quite possibly the last before the general election. You join us on the city's iconic quayside overlooking the magnificent River Tyne, an area steeped in industrial history, and we've been gauging reaction here to the Chancellor's plans throughout the day. Among his biggest announcements was a cut in national insurance by 2p in the pound for employees and the self-employed. Full child benefits will be paid to households where the highest earning parent is getting up to £60,000. The current limit is £50,000. And the non-dom tax regime for UK residents whose permanent home is overseas is to be replaced with new rules from April next year. Well, the Office for Budget Responsibility says the overall tax burden is actually set to reach its highest level for over 70 years. While the government says spending on public services will rise by 1% above inflation, some areas could still see cuts in the future. The OBR also predicts inflation will fall to the government's 2% target within a few months, and the UK economy will grow by 0.8% this year and 1.9% in 2025. Sir Keir Starmer described the budget as the last desperate act of a party that has failed and said the Conservatives aren't delivering the growth households need. We'll be hearing from Coletta Smith, who's with me here in Newcastle, and Faisal Islam will be analysing all the numbers. But first, Chris is live at Westminster for us tonight. Chris, over to you.
Evening to you, Clive. So the economic and the political backdrop to today is stark. The economy is flatlining and politically the Conservatives find their opinion poll ratings in the gutter. So the Chancellor faced one heck of a challenge. How does he attempt to take that on? It's nigh on impossible in one budget, even a couple of budgets. And the Chancellor's very character, his very approach to politics is to emphasise what he sees as a responsible caution. But how does that measure up to the prospect that many Conservative MPs fear, which is one of political oblivion? That is the central question today, and this is how the Chancellor attempted to take it on. Budget day from every angle.
Is this an election-winning budget?
Tradition, choreography and noisy musical protest out in Whitehall. Jeremy Hunt and his team in focus.
Mr. Chancellor of the Exchequer.
This is a budget during a recession, albeit a mild one, and interest rates remain high, the Chancellor acknowledged. But he wanted to signal his instinct is to cut tax when he believes it's responsible.
We can now help families not just with temporary cost of living support, but with permanent cuts in taxation.
And here was the headline measure on that, another cut in national insurance, a tax paid by most workers.
From April the 6th, employee national insurance will be cut by another 2p from 10% to 8%. And self-employed national insurance will be cut from 8% to 6%.
National insurance was cut by 2p in the pound a few months back too.
When combined with the autumn reductions, it means 27 million employees will get an average tax cut of £900 a year. 2 million self-employed will get a tax cut averaging £650, changes that make our system simpler and fairer.
And there was this change on child benefits. From next month, a parent will be able to earn more before losing it.
No one earning under £60,000 will pay the charge, taking 170,000 families out of paying it altogether. And because of the higher taper and threshold, nearly 500,000 families with children will save an average of £1,300 next year.
To pay for the tax cuts, tax rises on business class flights, holiday home owners, smoking and vaping. Duty on alcohol will be frozen until next February. Fuel duty has been frozen too. And then came the moment of political theft.
The government will abolish the current tax system for non-doms. Get rid.
The Chancellor nicking a Labour idea to remove a tax perk from often wealthy folk who live here but whose permanent home is abroad.
I aim to please all sides of the House in all my budgets.
Sir Keir Starmer.
What then from Labour, who hope to be delivering their own budget in government within a matter of months?
There we have it, the last desperate act of a party that has failed. Britain in recession, the national credit card maxed out, and despite the measures today, the highest tax burden for 70 years.
And, he added,
an economy smaller than when the Prime Minister entered Downing Street. The textbook definition of decline, that is their record. I mean, after 14 years, who do they actually think feels better off?
Other parties were pretty scathing too.
This is, let's face it, this is a last-ditch, tone-deaf approach to desperately try to recover in the polls. It's the embodiment of the Tory party before the people.
A bottom-of-the-barrel budget, nothing to make families truly better off after the catastrophic fall in living standards we've seen under the Conservatives.
How are you?
I'm well. Thank you very much.
This afternoon I had the chance to put questions to the Chancellor on your behalf. I pointed out to him he's taking £20 billion more in tax in 5 years' time, even with today's cuts in national insurance. So people are being clobbered, aren't they? For all of this talk of tax cuts, that's baloney. People are paying more.
Well, one of the reasons that tax receipts are higher is because the economy is set to get back to more growth.
And it's also because the thresholds for paying various rates of tax are frozen as people's incomes are rising. They're paying more.
Yes, but even if you take account of the thresholds, what you will see next year is a big cut in taxation for families earning the average income. It's a significant cut.
Thank you for the cup of tea.
Yeah.
Tonight, jackets off, the battle lines for the general election are becoming clearer. The economy centre stage. Chris Mason, BBC News at Westminster.
Well, that's some of the politics surrounding all this. What about the economics? How do the figures on all the announcements today add up? Faisal Islam has been taking a look.
Yes, Clive, the big picture here is that this is a relatively small budget without pre-election fireworks, save for that one big policy shift, and that is the 2p national insurance cut. It is significant, worth £11 billion a year in 2028-29. The Chancellor's choice on finding the money for it divides up something like this. Some tax rises, notably that extra tax on non-domiciled wealthy foreign residents, borrowed from the opposition, extending the energy levy, also an opposition policy. Vaping and other taxes are smaller, you can see them just over there. then essentially the gap is bridged by some extra borrowing in that year. This is still a significant tax cut. Added to the previous 2% cut in January, it sort of offsets about half of the previous massive income tax rise from the 6-year threshold freeze. Looking at those two big changes in the round, and here's what's really interesting. It's different depending on what you earn. The overall impact is a win by hundreds of pounds a year if you're in the middle there on £35,000, £55,000 salary. But earn, say, £15,000 or a higher salary, around £70,000, and you lose. The threshold freeze outweighs the national insurance cut so far. Mr Hunt would like to go further, though, with that NI. To make all this add up, however, and to fit inside the Chancellor's self-imposed limits for the national debt, he's had to sail close to the wind, cutting his room for manoeuvre in that final year to under £9 billion. As you can see, that's very low by the standards of history and of recent Chancellors. Indeed, any one of the following could wipe out most or all of this. That is, again, cancelling the fuel duty rise, or a reasonable slight change to the forecast, or the call to spend more on defence. And all of this is predicated on still very tight public spending totals that the Chancellor says he can deliver with AI and drones, but for which there will be no pre-election spending review.
It is very challenging because per person spending isn't growing in real terms, but the government has commitments to increase spending on healthcare, on defence, on overseas aid, in line with or faster than GDP. That means you've got to see real cuts in other parts of the public service, in areas like justice, areas like social care, in order to actually deliver those increases.
Indeed, some of those unprotected areas are currently showing real funding strains. Overall, the economic picture is a little bit better or less bad for an economy officially in recession. That's probably best shown by this chart of how household disposable income after inflation has taken a battering since the pandemic and wasn't due to recover for years. According to November's forecast, that recovery will now occur 2 years earlier, say the official forecasters, because of a faster fall in inflation, tax cuts and growth. Is that good news versus 3 months ago? Yes. Is it still a difficult picture of the last 4 years? Yes, as well. The Chancellor wants the country to think this is a genuine turning point. It may take some time to feel like that.
OK, some fascinating numbers there. Faisal, thank you. Faisal Islam, our economics editor. So what else did the Chancellor announce today? Well, there'll be a new tax on vapes from October 2026, following a consultation, and a one-off increase in tobacco duty to ensure vaping remains cheaper than smoking. The Chancellor also announced a one-off adjustment to the level of air passenger duty for travellers with non-economy tickets. And in an effort to make more properties available for rent to local people in tourist hotspots, he wants to abolish tax breaks on furnished holiday lets. The freeze on fuel and alcohol duty has been extended into next year, while the VAT registration threshold for small businesses will be increased to £90,000 from April. And the windfall tax on oil and gas companies will last another 12 months. So, do people feel better off after today's budget? Coletta Smith has spent the day gauging reaction here on Tyneside.
Budgets are always a balancing act. When it comes to precision, Steffi knows all about it. She's managing a growing business alongside a growing family.
I have 2 young children at the moment, and there's 2 more on the way, which is very exciting.
So she's desperate for the Chancellor to help with business as well as household costs.
It's been extremely stressful over the last 2 years.
Our next stop is the quayside. So this is where the Five Live gang are. Steffi's going to be watching the budget with the team from BBC 5 Live.
Oh, this is very fancy.
But I'm heading off across the river to the other side of Newcastle, to the border of Kenton and Gosforth, with a real mix of incomes. And I'm watching the budget with some extra musical accompaniment.
Here a bar, there a bar, everywhere a bar, bar. Oh.
So there's a big change here for child benefits. At the moment, those payments drop off when one person in the household starts earning £50,000. But from next month, that rate's going up to £60,000 a year, so that people will be able to earn more and still keep hold of those child benefit payments.
Would massively make a difference, yeah.
Laura's a nurse, returning to work full-time when her maternity leave ends in June.
So it would be great if it went up to 60. Especially with us, because we do unsociable hours. So if we do any other unsociable hours, that would bump it over the 50. So then you potentially wouldn't get the benefits, yeah.
That drop in national insurance payments means an average earner will be paying around £450 less each year in national insurance payments. But it's not as straightforward as that, because the rate that we start paying different levels of tax hasn't been increased. Now, the Resolution Foundation say that means for anyone earning less than £27,000, they'll actually be paying more in taxes overall.
It doesn't feel like it's going to touch the sides. A tax cut is not really the biggest thing that I'm interested in and want to see. I'd like to see our public services funded better.
Hello again.
Hello.
So we'll be on the budget.
Yes.
So have any of the changes today helped Steffi?
Small to medium enterprises need a lot more help at the moment. I think that increasing the child benefit is going to massively benefit a lot of working parents. That's something positive that we can take away from it.
Coletta, you touched on this in your report there. The government focusing on tax cuts. They believe that's how you could grow the economy. But clearly there's concern out there in the wider public about the state of public services. What more have you been hearing about that?
Yeah, lots of people saying they do want more spent on public services, no matter what their income level. And in terms of who's going to benefit the most, the crucial figure is around £27,000 in terms of your annual income. If you are earning less than that, the likelihood is, after all of today's announcements, you are going to be worse off. You're going to be paying more tax as a consequence. Here in the northeast, we're in an area of England that has the lowest average annual income. So people here are going to be hit harder by that than elsewhere. But overall, across the UK, we're talking about a third of the workforce potentially losing money here today. There was some relief, though, provided by the Chancellor, extending the Household Support Fund. Now, that's the safety net that's propping up food banks across the length and the breadth of the country at the moment. That was due to end in 3 weeks' time. Now it's got another 6 months to run. But today was really a budget for middle earners. So anyone earning more than around £27,000 is likely to be taking home more now in their pay packets. They may well get a boost from those child benefit changes as well, but not enough to compensate for all the other rising costs they're still being battered with. So I'm talking about mortgages, rents, car insurance, food bills that are still on the up at the moment, and the government haven't touched on any of that in today's budget. We're at a really crucial moment, Clive, because all of those extra direct payments to households that have been made over the last couple of years have now totally finished, and Citizens Advice today saying this year could be more difficult for households than last year. The government are banking on that economic change, but households are having to pay the bill in the meantime.
Sure, OK. Coletta, thank you. Coletta Smith, our cost of living correspondent there. Now, oil and gas companies are warning the Chancellor's decision to extend a windfall tax on profits will make it impossible to plan investment for energy transition and the path to net zero. And Scottish Conservatives are also up in arms, as James Cook reports now from Aberdeen.
It's a very important part of, well, the economy here in particular, but it's important for...
Just last week, the Prime Minister was here in the northeast of Scotland, insisting he was backing oil and gas.
We have a track record of being the only major party that is supportive of the North Sea industry, because I believe it's an important part of our country and our future.
Behind the scenes, the Scottish Tory leader Douglas Ross was urging Rishi Sunak and the Chancellor not to extend a windfall tax on energy profits. He failed.
I'm going to continue to raise within government, with the Chancellor and others, that this is the wrong choice and urge him to reconsider on that. And when the legislation comes forward to extend it, I'm going to use every mechanism available to oppose that legislation, because I think it's the wrong choice, because we need to provide security and certainty to the sector to invest going forward, and the decision of the Chancellor today doesn't do that.
3 of the Conservatives' 6 Scottish seats at Westminster are here in the North East, and the party had hoped that its strong support for oil and gas would help it in defending those seats. That task has now been made tougher for the Tories.
Happy that he's decided to extend the windfall tax on the oil and gas industry. A profit making more than £1 billion of profit a week. It's right that that industry is taxed to fund public services while people are struggling to heat their homes.
Our absolute priority is that there should be a just transition. Jobs should be protected. People should have high quality, highly skilled jobs, and neither Tories nor the Labour Party are prioritising the North East of Scotland or Scotland in general in their decisions.
Big oil firms insist extending the windfall tax risks investment, jobs and growth. But the Scottish Greens say North Sea profits must be used to fund the shift to renewable energy now. James Cook, BBC News, Aberdeen.
Well, as we've been hearing, the Chancellor says public spending will grow at 1% above inflation every year until 2029. Now, some government departments, such as health and schools, have what's called protected budgets, which means areas unprotected could see cuts in their funding. One such department is the Ministry of Justice, and Dominic Casciani has been looking at the potential impact there of falling budgets.
The government's challenges over public spending are enormous, and no more so than in crime and justice. Since 2019, it's reversed a cut in police numbers. It's recruited 20,000 extra officers. And as they solve more crimes, while the defendants end up in places like this, Luton Crown Court, it's running at capacity. And there's a 65,000 case backlog nationwide. And one of those serious cases is rape. Since the pandemic, the average number of days it takes to complete a rape prosecution has gone up and up. It's a situation that judges say is a stain on the system, an injustice to all. Now, judges today said they've got a plan to deal with the worst, longest delayed cases. But that's only going to work if the cash keeps coming in. And crucially, there's somewhere to put the criminals once they're convicted. Places like this, Bedford Prison up the road. Now, last month, inspectors said that the conditions here were among the worst they'd seen. 2/3 of the inmates are being held on remand, waiting for a trial date because of court backlogs, and that means they can't take part in rehabilitation. Now, the government is building 20,000 extra and new prison cells. The blue line shows how ministers expect the prison population to rise, reaching 100,000 in a year or so. But look at the dotted white line. That's what officials calculate could be the worst outcome if all the new police arrest more criminals and judges jail them more quickly. We could run out of cells. Today, the Chancellor committed £100 million to rehabilitation projects, but he took 5 times that away from day-to-day criminal justice spending. His critics say that if we want safer streets, there's a price to be paid.
Dominic Casciani reporting for us there. We're going to take a look at some of the day's other top stories now. And Ukraine's southern port city of Odessa has been hit in a missile strike during a visit by President Zelensky and the Greek Prime Minister. Let's get more now from James Waterhouse in the capital, Kiev. James, how serious was this attack?
Clive, it could have been very serious. Kyriakos Mitsotakis and Volodymyr Zelensky were hosting a joint press conference in the port of Odessa when, tonight, the Kremlin said it carried out a precision strike, in its words, on a hangar containing drones on the same site. Now, this is an area that is routinely hit by Russia. We just don't know whether both world leaders were deliberately targeted. But what we do know is that this was a near miss. When you look at what witnesses were saying, when you look at verified footage of the explosion, we're likely talking about the missile landing hundreds of meters away. Now, Volodymyr Zelensky is no stranger to risk. He travels to the front lines frequently in the past where near misses might not necessarily be reported. But what is clear here is that we know for the first time that a missile has landed precariously close. It could have been catastrophic for Greece, a NATO member, and Ukraine, a country still at war and still being invaded.
Yeah, very close shave. OK. James, thank you. James Waterhouse there in Kiev. Nikki Haley, the last remaining rival to Donald Trump for the Republican presidential nomination, is pulling out of the race for the White House. Now it comes after Mr. Trump and Joe Biden pretty much cleaned up in Super Tuesday's state primaries and caucuses, making a rerun of the 2020 election a virtual certainty. Sarah Smith has that story.
Donald Trump was taking a victory lap before he had quite secured his party's nomination, but he knew it was now in the bag.
They call it Super Tuesday for a reason. This is a big one. And they tell me, the pundits and otherwise, that there's never been one like this. There's never been anything so conclusive.
When he launched this campaign in the same room 16 months ago, he was not the favourite to win.
In order to make America great and glorious again, I am tonight announcing my candidacy for President of the United States.
4 criminal indictments and his claims of politically motivated persecution turbocharged that campaign, his mugshot becoming an electoral asset. Last night's results confirmed he is unstoppable, with only one exception in leafy Vermont.
The biggest primary night of the year and some fascinating results. Let's take a look at Vermont because it looks like Nikki Haley squeaking ahead.
One surprise victory was not enough to keep Nikki Haley in a race that she could not win. Pulling out, she quoted Margaret Thatcher and did not quite endorse Donald Trump.
It is now up to Donald Trump to earn the votes of those in our party and beyond it who did not support him. And I hope he does that.
Her departure is a disappointment for all those Republicans who would rather not vote for Donald Trump.
What he could learn from her is there's a portion of the Republican Party that right now would prefer someone other than him, then he probably needs to do something to earn their vote.
I usually vote Democrat, but, you know, I seen something different in her. And I was like, what might make me change?
They're not going to give a woman a chance. I don't think you ever will give a woman a chance to, to get in the White House.
Most voters say they don't want a rematch with the same old candidates as the last election, but that's the choice they're going to be stuck with. In this contest that nobody wanted, we've got 2 elderly gentlemen who each think the other is uniquely flawed and therefore beatable. Joe Biden is convinced when voters see and hear more of Donald Trump, they'll reject him. Mr. Trump thinks that Joe Biden's age and his record in office make him unelectable. Of course, only one of them will prove correct. Sarah Smith, BBC News, Washington.
Back here, the Secretary of State for Science, Michelle Donnellan, is facing a call to resign after she falsely accused an academic of supporting Hamas. Ms. Donnellan agreed to pay damages and legal costs, with the taxpayer footing the £15,000 bill. Damien Grammaticus is at Westminster. What's the background to all this, Damien?
Clive, in a nutshell, the minister saw a tweet from the academic. She misinterpreted it, didn't make any checks, but wrote to this science body where the individual had an advisory role, saying she was outraged and disgusted they'd been supporting Hamas and there should be swift action. Then published that on social media. Now, an investigation over months cleared Professor Kate Sang. She brought a libel action. The minister has had to retract in full. Her department has said it has paid that £15,000 in damages and costs because this related to her official functions. The opposition parties, well, they say it's an outrage. She should pay herself. The academics union, the UCU, says Michelle Donnellan should resign. They've lost confidence in her. But Downing Street has said the Prime Minister thinks she's an excellent minister and retains full confidence.
OK, Damien, thank you. Damien Grammaticus there at Westminster. We're going to return to our top story, of course, the budget today, and we're going to see how the papers are responding to some of the announcements. The Financial Times there says the Chancellor has left room to announce more tax cuts, but suggests his announcements today failed to deliver a knockout punch. On to The Guardian, a last desperate act is The Guardian's take on events there. It says taxes are at their highest levels since the 1940s. While The Express says the budget will turbocharge the economy. It says today's announcements will help bring inflation down. But The Mirror says the Chancellor's budget and the economy is stagnant. And The Telegraph splashes on the cut to national insurance. It's been telegraphed, frankly, for the last few days. And it says millions will benefit. OK, let's get a final word on all of this now from Faisal Islam, our economics editor, and Chris Mason, who's live at Westminster. First to you, Faisal. I'm wondering what economists are making of the Chancellor's budget today.
Yeah, this is a budget with a big reform at the heart of it to shift the tax burden away from workers using the proceeds of a previous big income tax rise. It's a budget of plagiarism where they've taken big ideas from the opposition party in the year of an election. And it's a budget where the Chancellor wants to communicate that he does have a plan. He accepts that he's grown the size of the state, grown the tax burden, but from now on, that will shrink. And what he needs, and what he acknowledged hadn't yet happened, was a turnaround in the economy. If he gets that, the forecasts could improve, and perhaps at another budget-like event before the election, he could offer those pre-election fireworks closer to the autumn.
OK, thank you, Faisal. Chris, is this a budget, do you think, that suggests an election is going to come before or after the summer?
I don't think, Clive, my hunch from what we heard today amounted to an electoral charge in the short term towards the polling stations. Instead, what we got from Jeremy Hunt was an attempt to portray himself as a careful, responsible custodian of the economy, attempting to, piece by piece, put the economy back together again. You'll have noticed in the interview I did with him, he was making an argument that middle earners feel a little bit better off if you compare the national insurance cuts with the changes in the tax thresholds. But the argument is bigger than that economically come the election. It's about how people feel about their economic prospects given inflation and mortgages and plenty else besides. Labour now feel more confident economically. The polls suggest they're treated more credibly economically. The Conservatives have a difficult economic picture to wrestle with. Today has been an insight into the crucial battleground come the election campaign, whenever it comes.
Indeed. Chris, thank you for that. Chris Mason there at Westminster, and Faisal Islam reporting for us too. Now, we're going to get a full look at the weather, and Sarah has more from the River Tyne. Hi there, Sarah.
Hi, Clive. Well, it's a dry but a chilly evening out there. Similar conditions, actually, for many of us. And I can bring you something a bit quieter weather-wise over the next few days. So sunny spells, a few scattered showers around tomorrow, and it's going to feel breezy. That's because we've got low pressure trying to move in from the Atlantic, high pressure across Scandinavia, and where those two pressure systems meet, a bit of a squeeze in the isobars. So for the rest of tonight, then, we've got a fair amount of cloud around for the northeast of England, eastern Scotland, and we'll see a little bit more low cloud, mist and fog forming a bit further south as well. Where we do keep the clearest of the skies, temperatures down to around 1 or 2 degrees, so quite a chilly night with a touch of frost first thing tomorrow. But frost and fog slowly clear away, and then a mostly dry day, but there will always be more cloud across parts of eastern England, eastern Scotland, and there'll be just a few rogue showers just developing, particularly through parts of the Midlands, drifting into Wales. I think the best of the sunshine will be for the southwest of England, Northern Ireland and western Scotland too. Now, where you're exposed to that fairly cool breeze coming in from the east or the southeast, I think we'll see single-figure temperatures for the likes of Aberdeen, Newcastle as well. But further south in the sunnier spells, we're likely to see highs of 10 or 11 degrees. Not much change into Friday, another mostly dry day. Probably a bit more sunshine across the southern half of the UK on Friday. Cloudier in the north, but I think you'll notice that breeze will be picking up gradually over the next few days. And temperatures 10 or 11 in the warmest spots, I think, on Friday. But again, pegged back to single figures where you're exposed to that breeze in the east. Into the weekend, still 1 or 2 showers around, so turning a little bit more unsettled. Bit of a breeze around, but certainly not a washout weekend. Some sunshine around too. And I think most people will be pleased that the next few days at least are looking a little bit drier. Clive.
OK, Sarah, thank you for that. Sarah Keith Lucas there. Well, that's it from the team here in Newcastle. The news, of course, continues here on BBC One as we join our colleagues for all the top stories where you are. Have a very good night.